With rumors yesterday that the Chicago Bulls could at some point be looking to move on from Billy Donovan, today I want to talk about some of the best candidates to replace Billy Donovan if it gets to that point, and also why Billy Donovan probably still isn't going anywhere. I know some Bulls fans aren't going to like hearing that. We're also going to look at the NBA Cup schedule for the Chicago Bulls that's been released and what's going on with Onrualp Bitim. We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. And so, start off with this. Greg Schwartz, we had a episode yesterday in which Greg Schwartz, his comments on Billy Donovan and what could be coming down the pipeline between Billy Donovan and the Chicago Bulls. Again, I'll recap it and we'll quote it by saying he said this: Donovan and Chicago aren't going to last long. Whether it's a firing or a mutual split, expect the Bulls to look for a younger head coach who specializes in player development and for Donovan to explore opportunities with a win-now organization. Now, before we get into the possible candidates, let's talk about the realities of this, right? Are the Bulls, or could the Bulls and Billy Donovan really be looking towards a split? I talked about this a little bit on that breaking news, that live stream that we did kind of after this dropped and kind of blew up. You got to first start off with this. We've heard nothing negative about Billy Donovan from the Bulls front office. Now, that does not mean that anything and again, moving on from a head coach doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a negative relationship. It could just come down to a different place in the franchise. But for what it's worth, we've heard nothing negative from Arturas Karnisovas or Mark Eversley in regards to Billy Donovan. If anything, at the season-ending press conference, or maybe it was after the trade, AK talked about needing to get Billy Donovan a better roster, basically, get him more weapons when it comes down to it. So that's the first thing there, right? Then you also have to look at the fact that Billy Donovan has 2 years left on his contract, 1 year after this upcoming season. And why fire a head coach, still have to pay them if you could just theoretically wait another season? That's kind of the thought process in there. Now, I'm not saying that the Bulls couldn't look to do it. I've even speculated before that Billy Donovan could move into the front office if Mark Eversley eventually moves on or anything like that, right? But at some point, let's say that there is a split. Why would that be happening? And why will the Bulls not do it now? That's something that a lot of Bulls fans, rightfully so, ask is, if the Bulls are going to do this, why didn't they go ahead and do it when they went rebuild? Well, first, it's the 2 years left on Billy Donovan's contract. You have to pay that unless he signs a contract to be a head coach of another team. You still have to pay it. This isn't like, for players, if you cut them, it's non-guaranteed or whatever, you don't have to pay him. No, you still got to pay your head coach for all those years. You still got to pay him. And so, that's something as well. And we know the Reinsdorfs, they don't like to pay multiple coaches if they can avoid it. Hell, they just got done paying Jim Boylan, I think at the beginning of last season, maybe at the end of the season prior to that. They've been paying two coaches. They don't typically like to do that. But then you also got to look at the fact that there's a pending Zach LaVine situation. And in yesterday's show, I talked a lot about if this is true. And people are asking, well, why didn't they do it before? It could be you don't want to bring in a new head coach while you have the Zach LaVine situation hanging over your head, and it could become a toxic relationship. Again, could be, right? If that's kind of the things that you look at it for. And then as well, you may want to take a look, and I've said this on yesterday's stream as well, if the Chicago Bulls, they're hoping that this team is going to be able to, maybe a Kobe White, a Josh Giddey, a Patrick Williams, maybe even a Modest Bucilis, maybe are much better initially than what they expected. And at that point, maybe you're looking at a team that is competing for a 6th or 7th seed. And then at that point, maybe you want to keep on Billy Donovan. But then you got to get into the thing. A lot of things that people quote as well for when it comes to Billy Donovan is, well, he didn't want to rebuild in OKC. Now, I agree with that. That is what's widely reported. He didn't really want to go through a rebuild. But I think even Billy Donovan, maybe looking back at that situation, he would have only been through a rebuild for maybe 2 years. And maybe if he's confident in what the Chicago Bulls are bringing in here in the roster, considering the close collaborative relationship that he does have with the Chicago Bulls front office, maybe he has a kind of a bigger palette now to go through a minor rebuild, but maybe with the understanding of we're not going to be trying to lose games. We're not going to have these 15-win seasons. We're going to be trying to improve year after year. So maybe those are the things that go into it. And so those are all the reasons why take this report with a grain of salt and take this rumor with a grain of salt and deal with it as this could be one of the possible outcomes rather than a foregone conclusion that Billy Donovan is going to be gone at season's end. Now, with that said, and this is kind of an independent list regardless if Billy stays or go, who are some of the coaches that could replace Billy Donovan? I know people have brought up somebody like Mark Jackson. Guys know my thoughts on Mark Jackson. I don't think Mark Jackson is getting back into the NBA anytime soon, personally. That's just my own personal thoughts on it. I think that the NBA has basically said, Mark Jackson, rightfully so, has stood by his comments. If that's what you truly believe, stand by your comments, regardless if we as the masses agree or disagree with it. Stand by what you believe. And I have a certain level of respect by anybody who does that. And I think that the time for Mark Jackson to make a return as a head coach has passed by. Now, that's not to say that Mark Jackson can't join another coach's staff at some point and then maybe work himself back up to being a head coach at some point. But we're talking about somebody taking over the head coaching role of the Chicago Bulls. And so that I already take off Mark Jackson. I don't think it's going to happen. Then people have looked at okay, what about Wes Unseld Jr., the guy that you just brought in? You brought in him and Dan Craig. Are these kind of maybe auditions to see if you can be the head coach? Wes Unseld Jr., I'm not blaming him entirely for what happened in Washington, but I think he's best as an assistant. You look at Dan Craig as well, who had some success as a head coach down in the G League, but still a career assistant. And I think you bring in those guys and you have them there as assistants, veteran assistants, if you do go with a young coach who maybe hasn't head coached at the NBA level yet. And that's if you even keep them, right? But so those are kind of the three names that a lot of people have brought up kind of initially. Mark Jackson, which comes up every single time. The work that he did with Clay, with Steph, with that young team to kind of teach them winning ways. And then Steve Kerr was able to come in, build on top of the foundation that Mark Jackson left. And then they won titles, right? But a lot of people look at that and they, automatically go to Mark Jackson. That's not something I do. Also, like I said, outside of the basketball aspect of it, there is the NBA aspect of it. And whether you believe the NBA is blackballing coaches or not, kind of my thought process. But, all right. So moving on from those guys that people have brought up and said, who are some of the other candidates? And I think when you look around the NBA, there are some solid candidates that also come from teams that have won titles or teams that have competed for titles or teams that have developed. First one up that a lot of people brought up in yesterday's live stream is Sam Cassell. He's currently right now the lead assistant for the Boston Celtics. He's been given a lot of the credit for the development of Jason Tatum, working with Jaylen Brown as well. He's done that. It will keep kind of what the Bulls have done in going out and getting assistant coaches who have had success developing star-level players, right? He's also worked with players like John Wall, Bradley Beal over the course of his career as well. So when you look at Sam Cassell, this guy is a champion. He has a long record of being in player development, which is something that clearly the Bulls, per the report, are looking for, if you believe that, right? A young head coach, which Sam Cassell young, but a young head coach that prioritizes player development. That is something to look at for us there. And Sam Cassell being with the Celtics as long as he has could be something as well. Like when you're trying to do something, a lot of teams tend to go after coaches that have been on championship programs before. Now that doesn't always work out. I want to be clear there. Shout out to Luke Walton, right? So it doesn't always work out if you go and get a guy, Luke Walton even stepping in for Steve Kerr when Steve Kerr has health issues, but didn't really work out as a head coach in none of the spots that he went to, right? And so you have to worry about that. And that's a fair statement to make when it comes down to it, is that, hey, yeah, you came from this organization that has won titles and things like that. He's been there since 2023. So it is what it is. When Joe Mazzulla took over as the head coach, basically they hired Sam Cassell as the assistant there. But, we'll see what happens. Sam Cassell, a champion, 4th NBA championship. So it is what it is there. He won a championship as a coach, 4 as a player. So look at that. Like he kind of brings some of that allure, right, when it comes down to it. So, that's what it comes down to. Now, moving on from Sam Cassell, who I do like Sam Cassell. I like the way that the Boston Celtics play. I like the way that they give effort on both sides of the ball. It's always a question when it comes to assistants, how much do they have in that game plan? But again, if you're looking at it, all right, Sam Cassell is definitely on that list. Wouldn't mind his name being on the short list. A name that not many people brought up is actually Chris Quinn that I want to talk about as well. Now, this is an assistant with the Miami Heat. It's another former player as well. He's worked up with that Miami Heat team The only thing about it, before we even get into the reasons why I do think this could work with Chris Quinn, is the reasons why it may not. The Miami Heat are a team that like to develop within. And if Pat Riley retires anytime soon and Eric Spoelstra moves into the front office, it's been wildly assumed that Chris Quinn is going to be the next head coach of the Miami Heat. And so you take that with a huge grain of salt of what you think that's going to be. He's been there since 2014. So that's what it comes down to. Again, the Miami Heat like to build up through their organization. He's been there a decade, similar to Eric Spoelstra. Eric Spoelstra, who worked his way up through the video room for the Miami Heat. So you got to look at that. But if you could pry him away from the Miami Heat and get him in as your head coach, listen, I think Chris Quinn is a really great, not just because of my love of Eric Spoelstra, because I really appreciate Eric Spoelstra as a head coach, but I think when you look at somebody that has that legacy that the Miami Heat do as far as developing up coaches, to me, listen, Chris Quinn, if he's he's marked as the heir apparent for Eric Spoelstra, that gives me more reason on why I would want him here. And Eric Spoelstra raves about Chris Quinn, talking about the way that he's been a part of player development, which is another thing that we're consistently looking at is player development. How has he contributed to player development over that time? Eric Spoelstra gives him a lot of credit for the way that they've been able to develop players. A lot of the times we look at Miami Heat, we talk about how many undrafted players that they've had on their teams when they've gone on championship runs, things like that. He's 40 years old, which is young for a head coach. And I think that Chris Quinn bringing in what he's learned from the Miami Heat, what have I always talked about when I've talked about a new coach for the Chicago Bulls? I always talk about getting a guy who can build a system, can build an organization, that can build a standard. Chris Quinn has come from that. And so there will be reason to think that he's going to try to come in and establish something similar here in Chicago if you mark him as your head coach. And make no mistake about it, Dan Craig as well, who's already assisting here, would have some history working with Chris Quinn. And so there may be some synergy there as well. I love Chris Quinn as a potential head coaching candidate overall. I would love if the Chicago Bulls, if they do move on for Billy Donovan, if they interview Chris Quinn. Now it comes down to what he interviews. Does he accept the interview? Or does he stay in Miami? Which, working for that organization and how that organization runs, he could very well say, hey, thank you for considering me for a head coaching position, but I'm going to wait it out here in Miami because I like the way that they've worked with me and I want to stay with family at this point. He's played for Miami. He's coached for Miami. So I think that may be one of the biggest hurdle in potentially getting Chris Quinn. But like I said, do not overlook Chris Quinn as a possible head coaching candidate. And if the Bulls do bring him in, I think you're getting a guy who has a lot of upside. Now, again, we've gotten high upside coaches before that doesn't necessarily work out, but I like him. I think he's a guy that's going to develop players. He's going to understand how to relate to these players as well, and he's going to develop guys. So, again, I think he would be a great choice to replace Billy Donovan. And then the guy that a lot of people brought in the chat, and I don't know how realistic it would even be to pry this guy away from his college team, Shaka Smart. And when you look at Shaka Smart, the things that I like about him is that when he first became a head coach, he employed a system that he called Havoc, which was a high pressure system. When you look at it, the offense was built around building from the attacking offensively from the inside, and the defense uses a heavy full court pressure, double teams, traps. They try to force turnovers. They try to disrupt what the offense does. That leads to they disrupt what the opposing offense does. That leads to their offense getting in better position. Go and look at it. It's been really, really good. Now, he doesn't use that same style as much now where he's at in Texas. But again, it's somebody that, he's not in Texas anymore. He didn't use it as much in Texas. But again, it's something to look out for as well. Now, thing that you like about Shaka Smart to me is the way that he builds relationships. And that is one thing I know Bulls fans, we like to get knee-jerky, right? And so a lot of Bulls fans are like, well, college coaches, we don't want college coaches. And I understand it. I'm not saying that I don't understand. Hell, even to a degree, to a degree, I agree with what you're saying. But also, I agree with looking at the numbers. When you look at Shaka Smart, with VCU, he had a win percentage of 74% over his time there from 2009 to 2015. He left briefly, he came back. Then you look at his time with Texas. He had a 55% win percentage, basically 56% win percentage, winning 109 games, losing 86 with Texas. Take that for what you will as well, right? Then you look at what he did in Marquette as well. In Marquette, a 71% win percentage over the last 3 seasons with that Marquette team. Again, This is a guy who, for his career, is 346 and 172, almost averaging a 67 win percentage in college. Now, college success does not mean NBA success by any stretch of the imagination, so I want to be clear on that. But I do think that Shaka Smart interviewing him, you could do a lot worse. You look at it, he fits that young guy, 47, with the coach, which is, of course, like older than a Chris Quinn, but he is a guy that could come in who can set a system for you. I think that you would have to allow him time. You may even have to reshape some of the pieces you already have on this roster to kind of fit his system. But this is a guy that I like. And I like the fact that he does have, even though he's kind of moved away from it, he had his own kind of identifiable system and play style that he developed at VCU that could come over and work in the NBA. You talk about high pressure defense, four court pressures, double teams, using traps. That is a modern style defense. Now, the offensive side of it, attacking from the inside out, that can work depending on your roster. We've moved on to a more three-point shooting league, so you want to take a look at that. But Shaka Smart is a guy that I loved it when people brought him up. I think he's done a great job, especially at Marquette. But this is a guy who's won at every level so far. And if you support him with the right veteran assistance, I think you're gonna have a chance at having a really good coach there. So that's the kind, and this is the way that I've always wanted the Bulls to go if they move on from Billy Donovan. A lot of people ask, well, who's the guy? You're gonna get Doc Rivers? You're gonna get Mark Jackson? I want the Bulls to go after a young coach, somebody who can build their name here, similar to what Tom Thibodeau did, right? So that's what I would love to see. This is the list of names that I've put together, but who are some of the names you would like to see if the Bulls truly do, or whenever? Because eventually they will move on from Billy Donovan. That's just the nature of coaching. I doubt Billy Donovan's going to turn into Pop and be with the Chicago Bulls for 15, 25 years, something like that. But if the Bulls do move on from Billy Donovan, who are some of the coaches that you would like to see the Bulls take consideration of to bring in as their next head coach, and why? Say why in the comments. It's easy just to put names, but give the reason why you like those guys. But with that said, let's move on. The Bulls announced their cup play games. They're scheduled for that next season. We're still waiting on the full schedule to drop, which may be dropped here in the next couple of days. So as far as our NBA Cup schedule, we play Cleveland November 15th. That's going to be an exciting matchup. It's always exciting when we play the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is a very different team, but with having Zach LaVine back healthy, be interested to see that. November 22nd against Atlanta. We always play Atlanta close. Those games are always fun. A lot of them come down to the wire. I don't know if that's going to play in the Bulls' benefit now that we don't have DeMar DeRozan, but we'll see. Next up, and by the way, a storyline in that Atlanta game, Manas Busilis and Zachary Risha-Share. Manas Busilis came out very loudly and adamantly, said that Risha-Share is ducking him. Hopefully that doesn't happen at the NBA level, my boy, because we will call you out. So there you go on that one. Then November 26th against the Washington Wizards. This is another good team that's had a very high draft pick. So we get to see how that works out for this team, and how the Bulls and Manas Busilis shape up against that team. And then November 29th against the defending champion Boston Celtics. I mean, listen, you always want to measure yourself up against the best. It could absolutely be a nightmare and a blowout in favor of the Boston Celtics, but that's a game fairly early into the season. That's within the first basically 6 weeks of the season. So good to see how we measure up against that Boston Celtics team, which could still be without Kristaps Porzingis to start that off, but we'll see there. But all right, coming off that, let me know what you guys think about the NBA Cup schedule. Are you excited about the NBA in-season tournament this year? Last year I was kind of notorious for being like I didn't care about the tournament, but then the games ended up being pretty competitive games. So let me know what you guys think about it. All right, before we move on, we've been talking about some of the back end of the bench players and what their future may hold for them, how they can get into the game, things like that. And the next player that I want to talk about is Onrualp Bitim. And this is a guy who had a very successful career over in EuroLeague. You look at him winning a slam dunk contest, how he can isolate over there, but we really didn't see a lot of that here with the Chicago Bulls. And so the biggest question that I have for Onrualp Bitim comes down to this, is that who is he as a three-point shooter in the NBA? When you look at it, he didn't shoot the ball effectively at all in any stretch of the imagination for the Bulls last season. 27% from three, 38% overall from the field, and it could have been come down to rhythm. He only took 1.9 three-pointers per game. He never really had a game where he just, like, the ball went to him a lot, right? And so also he suffered that eye injury kind of early in him, started getting minutes for the Chicago Bulls, and so that played a part into it as well. Initially, there was some very good promise for it. He went 2 for 2 in his second game out for the Chicago Bulls after going 0 for 1 in the first game. that he played for us. That's in February 22nd. And then you look at March. March was an up and down shooting a month for him. 40% in the first game in March against Milwaukee. That was in a loss, though. And then he had games as well that he shot 55%, 66%. And then he had games where we went 0 for 1, 0 for 2, 1 for 3, right? 0 for 2. So he never really got a value. Now, one game he did get 6 3-point shots. He went 1 for 6, 16% against the Dallas Mavericks. So there you look at it with that. And then by by April, that's after he had suffered the eye injury, he kind of fell out of the rotation at that point. Who Onrualp can be as a three-point shooter for a team that needs three-point shooting is one of the bigger things. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we trying to force Onrualp to become a shooter where maybe he is a scorer? Maybe there's somebody that needs more opportunities and the ball in their hands. And if that's the case, you have to question how much of those opportunities are going to realistically be here on this roster for Onrualp. So the Bulls have he's a non-guaranteed contract. I don't want to necessarily see them waive him. I do think he can end up playing some time in the G League. But when you look at a team that needs three-point shooting badly, and Onrualp also is a player that is no slouch defensively. He understands how to operate in space with running the field with like a Josh Giddey or Ayo Dosunmu. You can see where he can get his angles and his lanes and things like that. But the bigger question is how much opportunity is going to be given. Like some people will never blossom unless you give them a lot of opportunity. When you give somebody 3 shots a game, there's a lot of players who just aren't going to thrive in that scenario, and maybe Onrualp is one of those guys. So the question is now, who does Onrualp turn into? Who can he be for the Chicago Bulls team, and how much is he while he was a three-point shooter over there, how much of an NBA three-point shooter he is with the spacing, things like that. And that's something that we have to ask ourselves about Onrualp. But I like Onrualp still as a player. I do think that he is somebody that, for example, if this Bulls team was trying to be bad and you gave him opportunities to just say, go out and learn the NBA game. We're going to give you 8 shots per game. Go out there. We're going to put the ball in your hand some. I think he would develop. But, development isn't always done on the basketball court. Some of it has to be done in the offseason. Have you been working with Peter Patton? How much you've been working in your offseason? He released the cool I'm coming back video. Well, let's see what actually comes in. Let me know what you guys think, though, down below. What do you think Onrualp's role could be for the Chicago Bulls team? Do you think he's going to be relegated just to the bench or the G League? Or do you think he's going to be given an opportunity, much like I've been asking with Julian Phillips, with Dalen Terry? Will he be given an opportunity to round out his game and turn into the best version of himself? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. That's my time. Follow the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. BullCentralPod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. That's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.